we had this pattern for years of hoarding tape like you do ammo.
Yeah.
Like I don't even shoot 7.62 by 39. Really, it's just not. I'm not that interested. But I have, it's unimaginable how many steel case rounds I have. Like, why do I have those? Because I'm crazy.
Just in case.
It's like, so the prepper.
Better to have and not need than need and not have.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
But I'm not rational about it. Like, I'm sure you, who's like equipped an entire private army, is like, you're pretty rational about it. I'm not. I'm not exactly sure I need. I don't give a shit. Gold, ammo, whatever. I just want to hoard it, and because I feel, I can feel all this stuff. And tape is the same way.
But dudes with guns,
yeah,
are not a match for dudes with drones.
So if you're the kind of person, and I'm not, naming names or identifying myself by name, but if you're the kind of person who sees a deal on steel case 7.62 by 39, you're like, I need another 10,000 rounds, because in your gut you feel like something, volatility is coming. Is that pointless?
I've just been reading a book called Firepower, which is basically a history of gunpowder. And you track the change of warfare going from spears and longbows to the wheel locks, matchlock muskets, yes, flintlocks, artillery with bursting rounds. And I read that to try to understand we're now through a massive step change. Because, despite all the techno-wizardry of the U.S. military, the best weapon the enemy had was an IED.
Yes, I noticed.
And now the IEDs would be positioned along the road and clacked off remotely. Now the enemy can fly the IED at you at 120 miles an hour, low to the ground, even in a highly jammed environment. So the threat...
Highly jammed means there's no way to stop the signal.
Highly jammed, right. Even because the Russians are really good at jamming.
Yes.
And the Ukrainians, they've innovated taking a cheap racing drone, like with the goggles that somebody wears, FPV drone,
yeah,
and you put a beer can size charge that you can 3D print the casing for it in the field with a little copper disc on the front of it, and drive that into the back of a tank. And for $1,500, you destroy a $2 million tank. So that is like having a sniper rifle versus a guy with a longbow. It's a step change in warfare, and we're there right now. And the longer this combat goes in Ukraine, the Russians are getting a lot better. Ukrainians have too, but they're just trying to, the battle is the ultimate cauldron of learning.
Yes.
And bad ideas are quickly destroyed and discarded. And so the proliferation of that knowledge is staggering.
So what are we learning from watching?
I don't think the U.S. military is learning much.
Oh, good. No learning.
Well, no, the problem is the U.S. weapon systems aren't even that high demand because they're not that effective in that highly jammed environment. For 20 years of global war on terror, you were fighting against a very comparatively unsophisticated enemy. Now in a big state-on-state type war, the U.S. systems are not holding up. The Javelin missile, which Raytheon sells to the taxpayers for $200,000 a shot with a $300,000 command launch unit, the Ukrainians can only use that for the first shot in an ambush, because their IR detector, if they shoot the first tank, the tank is very hot. It's burning. If they try to shoot a second and third missile, the other missiles go for the very hot spot on the battlefield. You can't even discern. So then the Ukrainians shift from a $200,000 missile from the Americans to one that they build themselves for $29,000, and it works just as well.
And it's delivered on a drone.
Delivered on a drone or from an anti-tank missiles. Yeah, so there's the super high dollar American stuff is not doing so well in that battle space.
So I would assume, the world is watching this. Potential future adversaries are seeing on display American military capability.
And we should be concerned as taxpayers and as citizens that all this money we've spent, we have not gotten very good value for. In the same way.
But doesn't it display our vulnerability too? If our weapon systems aren't working in Ukraine, why would they work in other parts of the world? Right? Aren't we sort of showing our hand?
Look, some of the stuff works well, but at what cost?
Right.
Because, the Houthis are using a $20,000 to $50,000 drone to attack commercial shipping or U.S. shipping in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, and the U.S. has to shoot that down with not one, but 2 missiles that cost $2 million apiece. So you're costing us $4 million to shoot down a $50,000 drone. Bad math. So even in Washington, D.C.
Why wouldn't, because this is on display and the world is sort of watching, why wouldn't military planners in the United States be taking notes and adjusting accordingly?
Because the money flow keeps on going. The same way with no accountability and no self-introspection, no learning. Hey, look, who got fired, who got punished for a complete debacle in Afghanistan where over 20 years we replaced the Taliban with the Taliban.
Yeah,
and nobody's been fired. The only guy that got fired was Stu Scheller.
What a good man he is.
The young Marine who stood up and said, enough.
That's right.
Because if one of his Marines...
Scheller went to jail.
I know. Because if he said, look, if a couple of my young Marines lost a rifle on the rifle range, they would be punished. We left $80-some billion worth of military equipment and turned over the country to a terror organization, and everybody's been promoted, and everybody is just, it's business as usual. That's a problem. This kind of incompetence is not going to end well.
So, I mean, I have too many questions, and I do want to circle back to your initial point that warfare is completely different. It's a step change, as you said. But how, on this thread, how does the U.S. Congress, how do people who claim to support our troops, back the military, strong defense, the Liz Cheney wing of the Congress, like, how do they keep sending money to an organization that's increasingly incapable of defending the country?
I spoke to a bunch of members yesterday morning in Congress, and they were at the point of despair because they're trying to restrict the money and to bring some accountability. And they said the money is the amount of money that is sprinkled around the Capitol by the defense contractors, by effectively the brigades worth of lobbyists, thousands of lobbyists spreading tens of millions of dollars around politicians, and they just keep the money train going. It's really disgusting. And the big thing, in the article I wrote recently, I'd said, in Rome, like when the Romans lost a whole bunch of people at the Battle of Cannae.
Yes.
When their Senate met a couple weeks later, it was 40% undermanned. Why? Because the Roman elites actually served in the military and bore the consequences of failure. Our elites don't serve in the military. They have very little skin in the game, or no skin. And so for them, it's about money and grift.
Or their children serve in foreign militaries. So just back to the technology itself, which you've been watching all your life because you've been around it all your life. I think you had the world's largest private air force at one point. Is that true?
We had 73 aircraft that we owned and operated and flew into garden spots for the U.S. It was fun.
So what?
I was just at a Blackwater reunion last weekend, and we had it at the Alamo, and it was really cool standing there on hallowed ground, because I didn't realize that across the street from the Alamo is the Menger Bar, and that's actually where Teddy Roosevelt started the Rough Riders. So there's all kinds of Rough Rider memorabilia in this bar, raising a glass to a great American. And if I'd convinced Trump to change policy in Afghanistan to prevent the debacle, which ended up happening, I was going to call that unit the 2nd U.S. Volunteer Cavalry. The first U.S. Volunteer Cavalry was the Rough Riders.
San Juan Hill.
Exactly. This was going to be 2 USV. It would have worked. Afghanistan would be stable. We would have saved America the embarrassment.
Yes.
And really that, I'd say a pivotal moment for a massive collapse in American credibility and deterrence. And it would have cost 5% of what the U.S. was already spending.
So why couldn't, I remember that very well. And in my memory, you were not making the case for a forever occupation. You were making the case for a sensible drawdown that didn't destroy
all the conventional forces could have left.
Right.
90% of the contractors could have left. There would have been a small stay behind special operations force, 6,000 contractors. That's it. And would have kept accountability for the tens of billions of dollars of U.S. equipment that was already there, and would have kept the government upright. And, there's now Every Al Qaeda, every crazy terrorist organization has set up shop there in Afghanistan. Again, we've not heard the last of Afghanistan. It's really sad.
Why? And I remember that. In fact, I know we talked about it at the time, and it seemed sensible. It seemed kind of non-ideological, practical. How do we get this? Is kind of a clusterfuck. How do we get out in the best way possible, preserving our own interest to the extent that we can? Why didn't the Trump administration, take you up on that?
I would say the same neocon perpetual war presence in Washington that wants to do it the same way that we've been doing for decades, and I would argue losing doing that.
Yes,
and it's about money and power and perpetuation, not about actually having putting a bow on a bad situation.
But how do those people, as they inevitably do, seize the moral high ground in the opening moments of the ideological battle and position themselves as like the champions of freedom and human rights when in fact they're monsters? Like how do they get away with that every single time?
I think it's a direct result of the all volunteer force, which seems a good idea. I'm still supportive of it, but it means it's a very the people that actually serve, that bear the cost of these overseas efforts, is maybe 0.5% of the population serving. 3 or 4% know that 1%. And then 95% of America has no clue and no skin in the game. And so they're easily bullshitted by the posturing jackasses in Washington.
That's why Dan Crenshaw has a job. So I just want to get back to the technology, because I'm interested on behalf of all people who sense turmoil ahead and are, say, stockpiling ammo. Right. I think there are people like that. Is that fruitless given the technologies?
I would argue for Taiwan, for example, facing a possible invasion or issue coming from mainland China, the best thing they could do is build a home guard, because a well-armed, well-motivated people, I mean, as we showed in Afghanistan, as the Taliban showed the U.S. military, well-motivated people, even using weapons that are 70 years old, can still beat a superpower with all the techno gimmickry.
Yes.
It's not the steel in the ships that make a great Navy. It's the steel in the men.
Right.
The steel in the crew.
But are you ever going to see another war between states that's won or lost on the basis of artillery, tanks? I mean, are those the cavalry charges of today?
Artillery is still the king of battle, as the Ukrainians are learning the hard way. And the Russians have gone from, if you shot at the Russians a year and a half ago, it would take them about an hour and a half to shoot back accurately.
Yes.
To geolocate and to coordinate with their fire control centers to shoot back. Now they're down to about 2 or 3 minutes. So they've learned and they're coordinating and they've gotten a lot better. And it is wrong for us to assume that our kung fu is all that good right now.
And what role do drones play going forward, to the extent you can predict and imagine it?
Very significant. People say the tank is dead, it's gone forever. It will go just like chariots were the attack helicopter of 2,000 years ago. There'll still be a role for tanks, but people are going to have to figure out how to knock down the swarms of incoming drones with hard kill and soft kill, etc. It is always going to, warfare is going to ebb and flow, but the ability to program very sophisticated devices that fly very fast, that are very hard to kill. The first strategic offset after World War II was nuclear weapons.
Yes.
We had nukes, then the Russians did, and then it was about tonnage. Then the second offset was precision weaponry. Now everybody has precision weaponry. So I would argue that the third offset that the U.S. should try to pursue dominance, and we're far from it, is in an AI drone innovation application. And I would say the most innovation that's happened has been in Ukraine and Russia right now, and we are way behind. Because, again, Washington procurement people, the appropes people in Congress keep spending money in the same way on the same stupid cartel of defense contractors with the same failing results, when at the bleeding edge of battle, actual innovation is happening by dudes in their garage in Ukraine that are fighting for their lives, and they've innovated, but and we ignore that to our to our detriment.
So these are countries with fewer marketing majors and more engineers coming out of there,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
The marketing majors
definitely
bad at creating drones.
They've done well at STEM.
Yeah, they have done well. And they're smart people, which no one wants to say, but it's true. You may have come to the obvious conclusion that the real debate is not between Republican and Democrat or socialist and capitalist, right, left. The real battle is between people who are lying on purpose and people who are trying to tell you the truth. It's between good and evil. It's between honesty and falsehood. And we hope we are on the former side. That's why we created this network, the Tucker Carlson Network. And we invite you to subscribe to it. You go to tuckercarlson.com/podcast. Our entire archive is there. A lot of behind the scenes footage of what actually happens in this barn when only an iPhone is running. tuckercarlson.com/podcast. You will not regret it. What will drones be able to do, do you think, going in 10 years? What will that look like?
You could load a face, and between network surveillance and the facial recognition on that drone, find one person and fly into that person's head that fast.
Seriously?
Yeah. So identity management, privacy will become even more essential. You think about how many cameras, how much data is being constantly collected everywhere, from street cameras, from door knock, from doorbell cameras, from facial recognition at the airport. Privacy is really under attack.
Oh, yeah, well, I've noticed. And now TSA has decided to take your photograph every time you walk through. I went through yesterday, and they had stare into the screen and we'll assess your face. I said to the guy, is this mandatory? And he said, no, it's not. And I said, fuck that. I'm not doing that. And he goes, I agree with you. Like, okay. I mean, but like, what is that? Why are they doing that?
Data aggregation, because they can.
So it's not a good sign when your own government is gathering data on you, is it? Like, why would they possibly need that? Why would
think
they
about
want
what chipped our founding fathers off?
Right.
Paying some taxes on tea and land taxes, and I mean, I guess our idea of what we will resist over in terms of liberty and government intrusion has been very steadily eroding, and now it's, I would say, increasingly a steep curve of descent.
Yeah, and it does seem like the purpose of politicizing the military and making it left-wing, anti-white, pro-trans, all this stuff, which I think the right just sort of says, well, that's going to be a less effective military. It's bad. They make fun of it. But that seems way darker to me. I mean, it does seem like it's being weaponized against dissent in the United States.
I think, the military was one of the most trusted institutions.
For sure.
And I saw already, even in the 80s, I mean, look, I went to the Naval Academy in 1987, and I left after a year and a half because I found the political correctness and the nonsense already then on the double standards that were pursued by the Academy leadership while saying there are no double standards. I just found ridiculous.
What were the double standards?
I remember going to the O course the first time, and they said this was one height of a wall to get over for one gender and one height for the other one, and they said, oh, the standards are all the same. But wait a minute,
they're liars.
So yeah, so just if you're gonna call it the same, then be the same. But at least let's be consistent. And so the amount of recruiting for specific sports teams of people that were completely unqualified to be there or to be naval officers was staggering. I love the Navy. I just didn't like a school run by the federal government. So
I didn't fully realize that. So you made it through the first year where people drop out.
Yeah. No, I left halfway through my sophomore year. I finished my finals.
So you did the hard stuff and you still dropped out.
Yeah, it's not that hard. It's just you have to have a high tolerance for bullshit. That's all.
Yeah, that's dropped in you, I notice.
Yeah. But I rolled to Hillsdale. So, went quite the opposite, to one run by the federal government to one that accepted no federal funding at all.
Interesting. So even in 1987, why didn't anyone say anything about it? Because women don't fight different wars. Presumably it would be the same war. So that's like very obviously insane.
Look, I had no issue with women being at the academies, but at least make equal enforcement. That's all.
Yeah.
If it's going to be, you're going to call it the same, then be the same. That's fine. But what I also found, I went to Hillsdale and I joined the fire department of the local town. And I learned more about small unit leadership there than I did in the very artificial learning lab that was the academy.
Why'd you join the fire department in college?
Because it was cool. Because it was fun. Come on. I got to do a lot of things in life, but driving a fire truck to a fire, lights and sirens, is definitely in the top 5.
How many kids in your class were in the fire department?
None. Since then, it's been more of a thing, but I was the first one ever at Hillsdale to join the fire department. And it was convincing the gruff firefighters, and it was a full-time, part-time. So there was a couple of full-time guys, but the rest were like a butcher and a trash truck driver and building contractors. So convincing them that this snot-nosed college kid was okay to go through a burning building with them it was no small admissions process.
One of the things I think is most interesting about you, which I know you hate to talk about, but is the fact that you were from an affluent family, and so you didn't actually need to do any of that at all. So why did you do that?
Sense of mission, sense of service, and mostly a sense of adventure.
So you never thought like, we're rich. I don't need to, this is just nonsense. I'm going to.
No, that was never.
Bum around Europe for the summer?
Never part of the equation.
Why?
No, I did. No, I did. I got married between my junior and senior year, and I took a long honeymoon, and we went through Eastern Europe. But the funny thing is, we
went through Eastern Europe. What year was that?
That was 91. That was as the whole Soviet Union was collapsing.
Yeah, I got married that year. I remember.
And we went on the Baltic Liberation Tour with Pat Buchanan and Lou Rockwell from the Von Mises Institute. And we went to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and we visited the government buildings, which were still surrounded and occupied by Soviet Interior Ministry troops, but they'd had free elections. So it was fascinating to see a place literally at the inflection point of embracing.
What month in
freedom.
91 was this?
That was May.
Okay. So I got married that summer also, and I went to the Mid-Ocean Club in Tuckerstown, Bermuda. It seemed more romantic than Estonia. What did your wife think, your young bride think, when you're like, we're getting married, but actually the honeymoon is in Eastern Europe, this like the hellscape of Eastern Europe. Honey, do you know anything about Stalinist architecture? I'm going to show you.
We road tripped through, but it was really funny. I'll never forget. Bay Buchanan bought an entire uniform off of a Soviet border guard, a captain, for $20. And we were at a restaurant and comes back with a whole uniform on the hanger and $20. And as we're leaving the country, another one of our group had a luggage that you have to put through the scanner. And you can see in the scanner, it looks like there's a manhole cover in his suitcase. There's this huge disc. The Soviet border guard opens the thing. This is a very big problem. Well, how much to make the problem go away? $50. It was an entire bronze bust of Lenin that had been yanked off a building, and our friend was exporting it. So I thought, if they're selling Lenin for $50 off a government building, this is not long for communism.
Oh, and in fact, I think it was in August of that year that it ended.
2 months later, it was done.
That's incredible. So my final question about the drones. I mean, is it a crazy thing to consider the possibility that the government might employ this technology against its own citizens, deploy it against its own citizens? If they're putting if people are still rotting in prison for protesting at the Capitol on January 6th, if they're a woman got 4 years in prison yesterday for protesting outside an abortion clinic, it's a government at war with its own citizens. So why wouldn't drones be part of that?
Entirely possible.
How hard are they to shoot down with, say, a 12 gauge?
That's actually one of the, it's a big problem for the small FPV drones. They're so small and so hard to hit. It's almost like hitting a ptarmigan.
Very hard to hit that bird.
Very fast.
Very fast.
I know you love bird hunting, so I try to correlate it to, or maybe like a quail on cocaine.
Oh, it's that tough.
Yeah.
It sounds kind of sporty. So what is the defense? So if...
Nets.
Nets?
Nets are a cheap, simple defense for small FPV drones because it's a small charge. If you can keep the charge away from the target, the small charge doesn't have that much effect. But, P for plenty, you can always increase the poundage.
My sense is that police departments and state police have drones now.
For surveillance, yes.
for surveillance? How hard is it to alter a surveillance drone to become an offensive weapon?
Well, the Ukrainians and the Russians have done that in their garages or in a tent on the edge of battle pretty easily.
Okay. So why wouldn't, I mean, if you care about living in a non-totalitarian country, if you care about America, why wouldn't someone step and say, actually, no, we're not, we're just going to pass a federal law that no law enforcement or intel agency or the U.S. military, these things cannot be used domestically against Americans, period, under any circumstances.
Or certainly not armed.
Or surveillance. Like, why do you need, you know what I mean?
Look, for stopping a mass shooter or some actual terrorism event, it provides good situation awareness and it protects the cops who are trying to do an honest job. But the leakage, in the same way that the forever wars of Iraq or Afghanistan and all those surveillance tools that the government tells us they need to protect us, the danger is certainly some of that tech on the arms side leaking back to be used domestically.
I don't see any effort by the U.S. government to stop mass shootings. In fact, they seem to be abetting them. And time again, you find in the small print, in the write-up after the shooting, that the person has been detained repeatedly by some branch of government. You saw in Uvalde, the cops refused to go in and save the kids as they were being executed, et cetera, et cetera. There just doesn't seem any will to stop mass shootings. There seems to be instead.
Yeah, but I don't see that. I don't. The Uvalde one was not a. I would say that's not a top-down federal conspiracy. That was individual
local
inadequacy of training 100%. And readiness. Because there's dozens of other ones where the cops have just been spectacular, like in Nashville.
Yes,
but then you see the political correctness of them being reluctant to release the writings of this trans shooter who was out to kill Christians.
Right.
So great individual valor by those cops. Bad by the cop leadership or the law enforcement leadership by not releasing the truth. Let's have a massive disinfecting effect of truth on this situation.
So for sure, but there's no will obviously in the media to get to that information. So it's left to like people on X to do it. But I mean, you've been in and around the government since you were 18 and shipped off to Annapolis. So do you think it's fair for the rest of us who haven't to be skeptical of massive increases in government power, particularly military and law enforcement power, that are justified by some threat? Like,
we should be highly skeptical.
Yeah. Mass shooters, child molesters, human traffickers, Islamic terrorists. Like, I don't think the government does a good job of protecting us from any of those things, but they've certainly increased their power and their power to kill me and my family on the basis of those threats.
War on poverty, more poverty. War on drugs, more drugs. War on terrorism didn't go so well.
Right. And just to that, I know we're jumping around, but I have too many questions, but
maybe we both suffer from a little ADD.
Yeah. Right? Well, I mean, there's just a lot to go through. So you were at the center of the war on terror, more than any other American, I would say.
No.
Well, how? I mean,
we had our shoulder to the wheel pushing like everybody else.
But the scale was, I don't think there's ever been a more effective military contractor in a war that I'm aware of in the United States than Blackwater, which you started and ran. So, but, you were subject to the policymakers as well. And as in the Afghanistan withdrawal, not one of them, not only was not like indicted or punished, but not a single one of them sort of lost a step in career advancement. They all kind of went on to the Atlantic Council or whatever.
Or their board seats.
On the
big defense contractors.
So since you watched that, how did that happen? Like, how did Tory and Newland go from Dick Cheney's office to being like the number 2 person in the State Department overseeing the war in Ukraine? Like, that's just crazy to me.
Because it's almost a uniparty. It is the party of big government and big Washington and more spending and more warfare, and 100% wrong.
The guys that you serve with in the SEAL teams and that, who you've been around in the subsequent 30 years, like, how do they feel about that? Like guys who did, 3 or 4 deployments or more.
The guys that actually paid the cost
That's exactly right.
of bad policymaker decisions.
Yeah, where their friends commit suicide and they didn't get to see their kids grow up, or they got killed or lost a limb. Like those guys.
Yep.
What do they think?
They're disgusted. They're angry. They're righteously angry because They believe in the republic. When you join the military, you swear to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And you kind of join thinking all those enemies are going to be abroad, but some of the enemies of liberty are probably here. And when a elite enriches themselves and separates them from the realities of consequences, of accountability, that's a pendulum that swings out far, but nature has a way of swinging the pendulum back to the middle. And so that either it gets done within the rule of law and accountability, or things can come apart very quickly, frighteningly.
It's part of the accountability is informal. It's social pressure, which is very effective.
Shame.
Exactly.
And humor. First of all, we need to just laugh at the freaking incompetence. I'd say when you track, I made the last deployment on the USS America, an old, it was a fuel-fired aircraft carrier. And they used to, everything is measured on an aircraft carrier, especially the landings, because it's all about the aviators and who has the best launch and recovery, especially the traps. So they measure which wire you catch and everything. So once a month, there's a thing called the forecastle follies, which is the front of the ship, but below the flight deck where the chains come out of the belly.
Yep.
And so all the air wing and the senior ship's crew would muster there, and they'd go through all the scores, but then it would go through the most merciless roasting of anybody. It was the most vicious humor I've ever seen in my life.
Like guys who screwed up the landings?
Screwed up the landings, the XO, the CO. It was no holds barred. It was fantastic. It was hilarious and very healthy. But now that you have a much more politically correct military, you can't do that at all.
They don't do that anymore?
Nope. No.
But I mean, if you can't land an aircraft on a pitching deck of an aircraft carrier, I mean, you put your own life, the hardware, and the lives of the sailors at risk, correct?
Right.
Right. So the stakes could not be higher.
High stakes, very important mission, literally lives on the line. And it's good to reinforce good behavior and to punish bad behavior, and shame and derision of your peers matters.
So looking back, since again, you were so close to what was happening during that whole period, or at least until maybe 2012, but for the critical years, you were like right there. Who do you blame most for the mistakes made in Afghanistan and Iraq and the subsequent wars? Who are the villains? Who shouldn't get board seats?
Oof. Look, we went through like 18 different commanders, 18 different 4-star generals over the course of Afghanistan.
Got a lot of 4-star generals.
We have as many generals now as we did in World War II, when we had 14 million men under arms. So now you have 10% of that. So you have basically 1.4 million under arms versus 14. And we have the same amount of flag officers. So yeah, we are massively overstaffed. And you think about they have
all chiefs and no Indians.
Each 4-star general has a personal butler and a valet and a driver and a cook and all those kind of quaint 18th century habits of staff that they surrounded military generals with. We have that yet for our generals.
Back when generals were brave, though. Generals got killed in the Civil War.
Yes, and not so much now. So it's just enormous. There can be a massive winnowing of headcount across the board in generals, in staffs, and in civilians. The tooth to tail ratio of the military, of like how many, when you say teeth, people that put warheads on foreheads versus tail, has gotten way out of whack. We have way too much tail, like an alligator-sized tail with a salamander-sized bite.
It's so unbelievably corrupt. So, but again,
it's corrupt because we just keep throwing money at it and no one ever calls bullshit. A business that goes through a massive growth cycle, everybody can get fat and sloppy and lazy because there's always more money. And we never have to tighten a belt. And so the U.S. military has been on like a Krispy Kreme bender of donuts compounding amount of donuts consumed every day, and no one's ever tightened them up and saying, all right, today we're just PTing and we're not eating donuts. That's across our entire government, but especially in the military, which is supposed to exist constitutionally to defend and deter. And I don't think we're not getting the money that we're not getting the value that we're spending money on right now.
No, it seems we're at a point where it's dangerous.
Yep.
And it does seem, I just want to restate, I don't know this as a dead certain fact, but I can feel it very strongly. I think the purpose of it is to keep, I think the enemy that they're seeking to fight lives here. I mean, I think this is I think the policymakers feel that way. They're very anxious to control any instrument of force.
I would argue it's about for the defense contractors, they just want to keep selling expensive weapons.
Right.
And they will keep paying politicians to keep buying the expensive weapons. I don't feel sad for the White House as they deal with a problem like in Yemen, where the Houthis have become long-range pirates and have shut off the entire Red Sea. Like 50% of global container traffic flowed through the Red Sea. Now it doesn't. Egypt is losing $800 million a month in lost toll fees from container traffic, and all those ships have to go all the way around South Africa now to make it to Europe, coming out of Asia. It's a big problem. And I'm sure the Navy, the DOD policymakers only provide the administration with the $50 and $100 billion solution to go beat down the Houthis to make them behave. And in that article I wrote, I just come back to there's such a constant rejection of market-based private sector solutions, because the Saudis and the Israelis actually had this problem back in the 60s when there was a war in Yemen, and they hired David Sterling, the founder of the SAS, and he went there with 30 guys, and they kicked ass, and it worked, and it was cheap and simple and practical. And this article I wrote just is a litany of those kind of rejections, and that's my frustration, because I provided a lot of those options, even to deter the Ukraine war in the first place. When it's pretty. My internal intel sources gave me pretty good idea that already in December of 21, 3 months before the invasion, that the Russians were going to invade. That it was not a song and dance. And so I wrote a paper proposing a combination of Lend-Lease and Flying Tigers to deter the war. Because in 1940, when Britain was really in it, the U.S. gave 50 destroyers, a bunch of aircraft, guns, gave it to the Brits. We also provided aircraft and allowed U.S. pilots to take leave and go to work for the nationalist Chinese to stop the Japanese from bombing cities, called the Flying Tigers.
Yeah.
In this case...
And we armed Stalin.
Yeah. And made it possible to go from Moscow to Berlin to stop the Nazis. But Biden could have done one very simple thing. He could have announced, okay, no war necessary in Ukraine. They're never going to join part of NATO, but they're at least going to have an air force. Because there was already 200 aircraft set to retire from the U.S. Air Force to be flown to the desert in 2022. 50 F-15s, 50 F-16s, some A-10s, already written down to zero value to the taxpayer. They're going to be flown to the desert, to the boneyard, and parked for eternity. Transfer those to the Ukrainians would have been less than $1 billion, prevent the war, and the discussion of NATO done.
But they wanted the war, obviously.
Apparently.
Why?
Or they believe their own bullshit that their PowerPoints and their posturing would dissuade. Look, I understand why the Russians get ornery about it, because if the Russians or the Chinese were looking to make the northern provinces of Mexico into active parts of a Chinese or Russian alliance, we'd get ornery about that.
Well, obviously.
Yeah.
Right? If they put,
look at what happened when they put missiles in Cuba in 1962.
Yeah, but missiles in Tijuana, that would be unacceptable.
Right.
So my question is, and this is all complex and delicate, and I understand to some extent, but what I don't understand is sending Kamala Harris to the Munich Security Conference and saying at a press briefing with cameras rolling to Zelensky, we want you to join NATO. you only say that if you want a war. You want the Russians to invade. Like, why would they want that?
Maybe they're just that dumb.
I don't think, and I think they are dumb. I mean, they're definitely dumb. Tony Blinken? I mean, really? Dumb.
Having a rock concert in Kiev during massive combat operations while the Ukrainian army is getting crushed. he just visited and he's up there on stage. He's up there on stage with his guitar. It's like, that is Nero fiddling while Rome burns.
Here it is. So, yeah, I mean, he's a child, obviously, and like an angry, destructive child. But what happens? Like, where does this go? We send another $60 billion to Ukraine.
Most of that money goes to 5 major U.S. defense contractors.
Yes.
To replace at 5 times the cost what the weapons cost that we already sent the Ukrainians. Meaning, if we send them something that was built 10 years ago, well, now it's going to cost 4 and 5 times as much. So again, it's a massive grift paid by a Pentagon that doesn't know how to buy stuff cost effectively. It doesn't change the outcome on the battle. As the fields dry, it's May now, coming up on tank season.
Is it tank season again?
Weather still matters in warfare, and if you have a wet, snow-covered farm field, it's very muddy, very gooey, not great for tanks.
Mud season.
I think the Russians call it the Great Rasputitsa, the Great Slush.
Yeah.
That's done now. And as June comes, it'll be game on. And I think the Russian bear is hungry, and they're going to have a time. So the war should have been ended, never should have started. They should have made a deal, froze the lines 6 months into it.
Well,
but the Biden administration believed that all this American weaponry would have saved the day. It hasn't, and it's ugly. And the Russian commanders are not idiots. They know their history. The Battle of Kursk, which happened just north of where the fighting is now, was the largest tank battle in history. It was the last offensive effort of the German army against the Soviets. And they tried to push from the north and south on this salient. It was a bulge. And the Russians knew they were coming. And so they built lots of lines of defenses. It's the same thing they've done now, that they did last summer, which ate up all that equipment. And now the Ukrainians are very thin. They've had a lot of corruption issues. All the defenses that were supposed to be built by the Ukrainians are much smaller or non-existent. And so now it's allowing maneuver, and especially as the fields dry and you can maneuver, it's going to be a very ugly summer. Very ugly.
What do you think the Russians want?
I'd say now they want to absolutely humiliate the West and make sure that they never have a problem with Ukraine again.
And that seems achievable.
I'm afraid so.
What happens to Ukraine?
I don't know if it survives as an independent country. If they take Odessa, if they take the ability for Ukraine to export its grain, that really threatens the long-term economic viability. Maybe it goes back to, look, Western Ukraine used to be part of Poland.
Right.
Eastern Ukraine used to be part of Russia. So, maps move depending on, military victories drive diplomatic breakthroughs.
So you think
and right now the Russians are winning, and they're going to have a very good summer.
Is there anybody who's knowledgeable on this subject who believes Ukraine can, quote, win, which is to say push Russian troops all the way back to the old Russian border?
Well, I didn't really believe it ever.
I know that.
But I don't know who's advising the White House at this point or who they're listening to, but they probably need to change out their advisor list.
But then you have the Secretary of State, our buffoonish Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, boomer parody, showing up and telling the Ukrainians during his rock concert that, we're with you forever. Like, how could you say something like that when I've never met a single person who knows anything about the region who thinks Ukrainians will achieve victory no matter how much money we send them? Like, how could you say something like that?
It's good money after bad. And all we're doing now is facilitating the demise of Ukrainian men and destroying them for future generations.
So how many have died? I've asked members of Congress who are funding this stuff.
Hundreds of thousands.
But why, here's what I understand. If you're paying for this war, which the United States is, the U.S. Congress is, Mike Johnson is, don't you have a moral obligation to know its consequences? Like, how can you get up there with a Ukrainian lapel pin and talk about the brave Ukrainian people who are being killed by the hundreds of thousands, and you don't even keep track of the casualties? Like, aren't you kind of a monster for doing that? I don't understand.
And you look at, if you made the pictures of the modern battle space on the front a little grainy and black and white,
yep,
it's indistinguishable from the Battle of the Somme or World War I.
Well, that's what it's exactly right.
Artillery, a grinding, crushing, pointless loss of humanity.
But it's being abetted by our policymakers. Like they're responsible for this to some extent. Like what?
And it's shocking how uniparty government has become.
You don't seem shocked that they don't care about how many Ukrainians have died.
They don't care about how many U.S. troops die. Right. Really,
good point. No, it's a totally fair point. So
because they'll send U.S. troops to war with a whole bunch of cockamamie rules of engagement and policies, and it's just not a serious way to wage warfare. The whole premise of GWAT was that we could, by American magic and precision, we could always just clip off the head of the snake, and the whole body would die of the snake. And that flies in the face of every kind of warfare. When you look back to World War II, we killed off 30% of the German male population. World War I, same. American Civil War, same. The continental wars in Europe in the 1800s, back to the Punic and Peloponnesian Wars. You destroy their manpower, their logistics, and their finance. This, cutting off the head of the snake, is a fool's errand.
Is there any precedent for it in history?
No.
So I thought sort of a key component of education at the military academies was military history. No, I'm serious. And you're a living example of it. You went to one and you know an awful lot about your business.
I didn't learn that at the academy.
Really?
No, that's a lifetime of curiosity. I was a military history geek as a kid when my family went to Normandy when I was 11. And, I was the tour guide. Sword Gold, Juno Beach, Pegasus Bridge, all that. Yeah, I was that nerdy, geeky kid.
So do you think your average, like modern flag officer is just sort of not aware of the history of warfare?
I'm sure they get some level of it, but they have not made it a career. I'd say the best book I read on general officers was it was a British military study. It's called The Psychology of Military Incompetence. And it went through 5 of the biggest disasters in British military history, like the surrender at Singapore.
Yeah, Khartoum.
Yeah, Khartoum, Baghdad in World War I.
Of course, the Afghan withdrawal.
Yes.
Into Peshawar.
Yes. And it literally looked through the guy's childhood, where he went to school, his relationship with his father, all the rest, and very consistent themes. And
what were they?
They were very bookish, very geeky, not self, no introspection.
Yeah. So they're Tony Blinken, basically.
Or just not people able to say, okay, this is not working. We're gonna attack the boat because this is not working in this direction. And so
they're weak men, in other words.
Yeah, look, the anomaly of Patton doesn't occur very often.
Patton, who's been maligned since his death, remarkable human being, and of course, Hollywood is, I don't know how many movies they've done telling us Patton was bad, but there is some suggestion that Patton was also murdered. Do you think that that's possible?
It'd be a hell of a difficult. Well, I don't know if the traffic accident. The Jeep rollover
but
was an accident?
Well, but he survived it and then died later.
Yes. I don't know. But he hated the Soviets. He hated communism.
Oh, I know. So I don't want to get too far afield here, but that does seem like a pivot point in world history where April 1945, Hitler kills himself, Berlin is occupied by the Russians, et cetera, et cetera. We win in Europe. And then we sort of like kind of pivot toward the Soviet Union for a few years till maybe the Rosenbergs or slightly before.
Well, and even the amount of communist agents that were surrounding Roosevelt.
Oh, well,
Harry Hopkins.
Yes. Of course. Well, Harry Hopkins is literally a
communist.
Soviet agent. Yeah, right. So, like, why did that happen? Like, how do we fight this war for freedom and then wind up sort of handing Poland to Stalin, for example, or on the side of the totalitarian?
Handing all of those countries to the Warsaw
Well, of course.
Pact. Yeah, it showed...
so how is this a war for freedom if we're handing
an exhaustion of moral leadership?
Yeah.
I think...
Who was that? Who do you think, if we could hold one person responsible for that?
Truman was president.
Yeah, no.
Because Roosevelt was dead. So, as Churchill said, he died in the traces. But I think... I think when you look at history, the lie of socialism, communism, it's easy for elitists to love that paradigm because the right wing Austrian school economics approach is massive decentralization, decision making at the micro level. The farmer knows what prices are, has a good idea what demand is going to be, decides whether he's going to plant more acres that year or not, and takes that risk himself. The Soviet planner says, I need everyone to plant this many acres, and we're going to do it at this price. And it's the lie of individual incentive versus massive central planning to the betterment of elite thinking.
Right.
With the grift that goes with it. And that's like a mind worm disease that so many people generation after generation, continue to fall for.
Yeah, it's a mom-based system, whereas the let the farmer figure it out, it's a dad-based system.
Yeah.
It's true. Yeah, what are you, a farmer? Like, how do you know? Like, that's what your dad says. Your mom's like, no, let's get it all. Sorry.
But that's why I'm so excited to see Milei having success in Argentina. For a guy, and maybe it's an analogy to America. Because he got sick of, at the end of World War II, per capita living standards in Argentina were higher than Switzerland.
Yes.
Peronistas, socialists take over. They run the country basically off the cliff. Hyperinflation, economic wreckage, terrible. Milei gets sick of not only the Peronistas, but the pathetic so-called right-wing opposition, which is not opposition. He starts his own political party, and he wins. I like any guy that'll campaign with a chainsaw.
I agree with that. You think that'll happen here?
I don't think the Republican Party is really that salvageable anymore.
No, of course
because
not.
It's been gobbled up by corporatists.
Yes.
And the defense industry now spreads money equally, right and left. Not even really right, just across the Washington insiders. So yeah, maybe an entirely new political movement. That's why Trump is transformational, because he kind of came outside the Republican Party,
right,
and did it. And I hope he can move the needle somewhere in the right direction, because it's teetering.
So I got to ask you a personal question. We were in the Middle East together not that long ago, and I noticed two things. One, you flew coach to the Middle East, which obviously you don't need to do, but you did it on purpose. I think that is your custom. We're the same age, 3 weeks apart. And I think most, why would you do that? And the second thing I noticed is you went from there to some far more obscure part of the world. So explain those things, if you would.
When I got out of the SEAL teams earlier than I wanted to, I loved being a SEAL. I was pretty good at it, I think. And, I would have had a nice career going there.
For those who don't know the story, if you could explain why you got out.
Oh, my dad died, and when I was 25, and my wife got cancer. No, I was 26, she was 29, and she got cancer. So I got out to sort out the home front. And that's really why I started Blackwater, just as a way to stay connected to the SEAL teams. I knew nothing of business, nothing of land development, nothing of government contracting, but I kind of knew what the special operations community needed. And building that business was a really great experience. It was family policy for my dad to not come and work in the family business after college. You had to go do your own thing. I had nothing. I didn't want anything to do with this business. I was not I don't think I was really suited for it. And, but I was going to come and work with him after 12 years or so of being a SEAL. Starting Blackwater, building it was one of the most satisfying things I've ever done in my life, because bringing together people with great talents that were really good, that they'd gained in the military and they'd retired or gotten out, and having it smashed the way it was really left a bad taste in my mouth. And I'll be honest, I carry a big chip on my shoulder yet for it. And I try to keep it in perspective. So look, I had a business that was crushed and lost. Thousands of guys lost their lives, their limbs, their mental health, their spouses over a badly run war in 2 theaters by idiot Washington elites. Same idiots that smashed my business. So yeah, I got a chip on my shoulder to do something big and effective and spectacular again, and run hard until that happens, or I die trying.
But I mean, 54, 55-year-old guys who've been successful, which you have been, despite having your business smashed, they don't fly coach. Like, what is that? Is that like just a Spartan impulse, or you just don't want to get soft?
You get there at the same time.
Yeah, but it's...
Tucker, I fly so much that... Anyway. Look,
and no, that's just weird. I know. No, we're the same age. I know how this works.
Look, I'm not a purist. I do fly business class 10% of the time.
I mean, that's fine if you're flying to Fort Lauderdale from DC or something, but Dubai's a long way. I just think it's very, very interesting.
Learn to sleep in any position.
So that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. What's the weirdest place you've been recently? Why are you always in Africa? What do you do for a living, Erik? I feel like I know you pretty well. Not really sure.
I would say there are lots of countries that need help organizing with the basics of tax collection and security assistance and border security and police advisement, because what we take for granted in America, if you want to start a business in America, you can call a law office in Delaware, get a business in 2 hours for $200. It's simple. And you can get title to your land here, and you can get a bank account, you get a business license, you can do all those things that make capital formation possible. There are so many parts of the world where that's not possible. And so providing them the very basic means of a reliable police department, or the means to stop gangs, jihadi gangs, criminal gangs, whatever. So I do provide some advice to countries how to do that from time to time.
I judging by what little I know of your travel schedule, it seems pretty frequent. That's interesting. So since you are everywhere all the time, and most Americans are, including me, sort of only dimly aware of what's happening around the world, name 3 places we should be paying more attention to now than we are.
The Chinese Communist Party has been very active in Mexico. The fentanyl crisis is very much, last year fentanyl in America killed like 109,000 people.
Yes.
It is funded, organized, logistically facilitated by the Chinese Communist Party to move the precursor chemicals that are actually made near Wuhan, China, shipped to either Venezuela or Mexico, fabricated into fentanyl, and basically blended with other common drugs that people are taking. And it doesn't make any sense to do so, because why would a drug dealer want to kill his customers? That's what's happening. And it is it's a fuck you from the CCP against the West for the opium wars of the 1840s. And it's done to
murder American children.
100%. Yes.
And just to be clear, these are not junkies who took too much. These are kids who ordered a college Valium off Instagram.
Yes. Or a bootleg Percocet or something.
Yeah, exactly.
And so there are people dying. And that is, you trace that, and I can show all of that going right back to mainland China.
Why are we sending all these armaments to Ukraine when we could bomb those facilities in Mexico? If you're killing 100,000 Americans
you don't need to bomb. Fire is an underutilized tool.
That's true. Well, it's happening here. I noticed there are quite a few manufacturing and agricultural facilities that seem to be going up in smoke in this country.
Yeah. And so look, at the same, and on that, the last time Blinken was in Beijing, he didn't even call him on it to say, stop. He said, well, no, maybe some of the stuff is coming from China, but it's really just a accidental shipping problem. I mean, it is such a denial of reality. It's hard.
And so is
hard
that,
to stomach.
so I guess what you're saying is you're not speculating about this. This is known.
100%.
Do the intel agencies, I assume, know this?
Yeah, but nobody wants to do anything.
Why?
I think you have an agency that doesn't want to do their job.
Which agency?
The CIA. Because I think, and I know you have rightly very mixed feelings on the CIA.
Huh.
However, the mission of the CIA, if you think about the State Department can handle 5% of issues, diplomats and embassies. You want your military over here, your conventional military. It's a big, angry dog waiting to be let off leash. That hopefully never is. The middle of the world, those problems, you think about how the Soviet Union was really undermined in the 80s. There was 20 covert action findings that were signed, coupled by Carter, mostly by Reagan, done to undermine the Soviet Union economically, politically, culturally, socially. And that was done under Title 50 authorities, and that worked without having to involve big military expenditure. If you want to stop, like how we know fentanyl is a problem. We know the Chinese are a problem doing it. That's specifically what the Title 50 authorities are for, to say to 6 guys, go make that problem stop. And if you have an agency that doesn't want to do their job, that's why it's not happening.
But they seem to be doing so many other things. I mean, I applied to CIA. My dad worked with CIA. I was never against CIA. I thought only like dumb liberals were against CIA, and traitors or whatever. So my views on CIA have evolved based on things that I have seen and personally experienced. And my conclusion is not that everyone there, particularly, the paramilitaries, I know a million of them, seem like great guys, whatever, but on some like basic level, it seems totally out of control to me.
It is. I mean, when you have the leadership of the CIA, this Havana syndrome is a real thing.
What does that mean?
It's effectively a microwave weapon that's been used to effectively blast the brains of Americans working out of embassies, first in Havana, Colombia, Delhi, Hanoi, Vienna, Washington, D.C., lots of places. Okay? Severely hurting Americans serving abroad. And the CIA director says it's all in their minds.
It's bulimia.
Yeah, that's wrong. When your people are getting screwed by a...
So you think that's... I don't have a view on that. I mean, I don't know the answer, but I'm sympathetic open to both possibilities being true. But you think based on evidence that this is absolutely real?
Yes. I know it to be real.
Wow. Who's doing this and why?
It was a device that was developed in the Soviet Union in the early 70s, actually in Ukraine. So I think the Kharkiv development plant. Not that it had nothing to do with the Ukrainians now, but it's it's about the size of like a beverage cart on an aircraft. That size device. And it's very damaging. And the fact that the Russians can do that to us without consequences, it shows how pathetic they view the CIA and the U.S. government to not push back on consequences.
So CIA, what motive would they have to pretend this wasn't real?
Because it would require pushback somewhere, somehow.
But they're literally fighting Russia in Ukraine. CIA is all over Ukraine fighting Russia.
Good question. I mean, put it this way. They don't like me enough that I was uninvited from a dear friend's retirement 10 days ago.
Oh, I bet they don't like you. And you've obviously worked with them most of your life, right?
We did a lot of great work for them. 100% success rate. But yeah, look, the wrong people being in charge. The agency has also gotten hyper bloated. Basically the same number of case officers that there's always been for 25 years. But the place has grown tenfold of all the wrong kind of people. Under the decision making of a guy like Brennan.
Yes.
And why does Brennan hate the actual DO, the director of operations? Because he's a failed case officer. He flunked out of school.
Right.
I mean, how did a guy that voted for Gus Hall in 1976, who was Gus Hall?
Gustavo Hallberg. He was the Finnish-American head of the American Communist Party in New York City.
Exactly. How does a guy vote for the head of the Communist Party in 1976 at the height of the Cold War and then pass whatever background check the agency is doing and have a security clearance? I find that stunning.
He retains his security clearance because the last administration refused to strip him of his security clearance, despite the fact he was actively working to undermine a democratically elected president.
Yeah.
No, I know. The levels of betrayal and self-betrayal are just almost mind-boggling. Let me ask you specifically about what the CIA does in Ukraine. So I think it's fair to say, based on what even the New York Times has reported, that the CIA is running effectively the Ukrainian intel services.
I don't know. I honestly don't know that. I'm certainly they have been there advising and supporting, but I think the Ukrainians probably grew frustrated at lack of willingness to do certain things. So I don't know where the U.S. support ends and where the Ukrainian unilateral stuff begins.
So, but I asked because they've assassinated people. I think they tried to assassinate me, for example, but they definitely killed Alexander Dugин's daughter. They, allowed an American critic of the Ukrainian government to die in prison, Gonzalo Lira. And you're sort of like, well, wait a second. If this is a proxy war and we're overseeing it, then is the U.S. government aware of this, responsible for it? Like, what? The U.S. government should protect American citizens, but clearly it's not.
If you had a honest look, Devin Nunes did a good job as the chairman of the HIPC of trying to dig into the nonsense. And he obviously met all kinds of resistance, but he had fight in him. Now, the Republican oversight of the Intel Committee, or of the Intel agencies, completely inadequate.
But even then, and I like Devin a lot, but those guys are all afraid of the CIA, as you know. They're afraid of them. They know they're being spied on by CIA or NSA or any, FBI. They know they're being, members of Congress that are supposed to be in charge of overseeing these agencies are being spied on by them. They're fully aware of that. I know because they've told me to my face. I'm not guessing. And that's not democracy. That's like totally crazy.
Yeah, that's like Marcus Wolf and the Stasi. That's
exactly
what he did.
Exactly right. The East German reference.
Because the Stasi was way more effective than any other intel service, even the KGB.
Yes.
It was the embodiment of German efficiency, innovation, and...
Well, it was like the only effective institution in the entire country.
Alles war in Ordnung.
What does that mean?
Everything was in order.
Yeah. Nice. So, and then I know that CIA runs businesses outside the country, and those are sources of income for the agency. How can a government agency run businesses? I don't understand that and profit from that.
I am truly not aware of any of that.
Okay. But how do you rein it in? I mean, because it, of course, could be an essential tool of diplomacy, statecraft, of the projection of power. I mean, you could see how CIA could be helpful to your country.
The agency is the most easy to reform of all federal agencies. Civil service rules don't apply.
Yes.
You can fire anyone for any reason that fast. You could clean house, have a all hands meeting at the Bubble on a Friday, and send 50% of them home. Send them out to their cars and tell them we'll ship you your stuff from your desk. You could clean it out that fast.
But why does no one do that?
Maybe no one's had the balls as the director or the deputy director to do that.
Do you believe CIA has in the last 25 years used violence against any American citizen?
Yeah, Barack Obama killed an American citizen and his 16-year-old son.
Correct.
Al-Awlaki in Yemen.
Right, and that's publicly known. But there are all sorts of, there's evidence that that's not an isolated.
Maybe there's more, but I know that one.
Yeah. So you don't think it's crazy to assume that?
Entirely possible. There's a lot of people that are considered American citizens that probably shouldn't be considered American citizens.
I agree with that completely.
Right?
But an actual American, someone who grew up here.
Yeah, fair. But the left has so devalued citizenship.
Right.
It should mean something to be an American.
Course.
I mean, a Roman citizen, it meant something.
Oh, a Venezuelan gang member who's here illegally is every bit as American as you, who were born in Western Michigan. So yes, I'm quite aware of that.
Anchor babies, birthright citizenship, all of that must go.
Yeah, you wonder, if we've reached a point where it's impossible for the country to act in its own interest just because of the changes due to immigration.
I read a lot of history, and I know that things have been a lot worse in certain societies, and corrective events can be shocking and traumatic to people, but it's still possible.
CIA, and not just CIA, but FBI and other agencies supposed to be enforcing the law and gathering intelligence have, this has been shown, withheld information from democratically elected presidents. A number of them, certainly Trump. That's a crime, is it not?
Yeah, and it should be met with immediate discipline, and that's a matter of having people that will follow through and wade through the bureaucratic process and exercise the authority that they're charged with doing. Right? When you join the military, you swear to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We should probably do something similar for any civilian employee of the federal government, that they swear to defend the Constitution, not swear allegiance to a political leader.
Of course not.
Constitution.
Right, but it's not a constitutional republic if unelected employees of the federal government ignore the elected employees.
Yeah, well, that's something, love it or hate it, at Blackwater, every contractor that worked for us swore to defend the Constitution. The same oath they swore when they joined the military or law enforcement. They swore it again in our presence as a reminder that we're here to serve.
So I want to ask you about spying on American citizens, so we know that it's widespread, it's accelerating, data is being collected about every single one of us, and the vector for a lot of that is the phone. So it's like super useful, of course, but it's also the main vulnerability if you care about privacy and freedom. So you've created a phone that allows people to some extent, to opt out of the current spying regime.
Let me back up to where, I guess, where this started. If you think about after 9/11, suddenly, holy shit, all these federal agencies are waking up, and how do we prevent this kind of conspiracy and attack against us again? And so they start looking at data. But of course, in 9/11, we didn't have smartphones. But as smartphones become available, and the technology that goes around a smartphone, because what is a smartphone? It's basically a highly capable personal computer in your hand.
Yeah.
That's constantly linked to a network.
Yes.
And so as ad data, the private sector always innovates much faster than governments do. And so as Apple and Google mobile services start developing phones, they put ad IDs and tracking information on those phones. Why? To micro-target you to sell advertising. They gather and collect micro information about you so that they can sell precision information to advertisers who want to sell you stuff.
Can you give us a sense of what that information is? What do they know about you?
Well, an advertising ID is it's like a 25-digit alphanumeric code that sits on your phone. And it enables to collect where you go, what you buy, who you call, and what you browse. It even works with the apps sitting on your phone, which are also built with a software developer kit that comes from Google, and they pay you more to put the Google hooks in so that those apps can also turn on the microphone on your phone, or the camera, or the GPS, so that your phone, yes, it's a computer, but effectively becomes a mobile microphone collection listening device that fits in your pocket or sits in your nightstand, and it collects anything and everything about what you do. And so it's almost been like a slow boiling of a frog, because as smartphones become common, it becomes very convenient, and it's wonderful, and it becomes more and more pervasive in our lives, providing us music and news and communications and pictures and videos of our family. Every bit of that data is collected, analyzed, parsed, and resold to advertisers. That's the 5 leading big tech companies have a combined market cap that's like the 3rd or 4th largest nation in the world off of that surveillance capitalism model. So as smartphones have become available, it's slow boiled all of us into a point of holy shit. And I guess for me, the oh shit moment was after the 2020 election and seeing the power that big tech had to sway that election and to then coordinate and to control who could speak, who could speak on certain platforms and zeroing out certain people. And I actually had a tech team together at the time doing a forensics thing. And in a rage phone call, I said, fuck it, we're going to build a phone. And we pivoted. And that team then started working. And we built a phone as an answer, because we're never going to make big tech change by whining about it. They're way too much money and way too much power. We have to provide a means for people to communicate freely, securely, and most importantly, that they can control their data. I think it's inherently American that we expect privacy as Americans. If you think about the Constitution, First Amendment is free speech, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. Second, we know what that guarantees. The first. But what's the Third Amendment? What was most important for the founding fathers? Privacy. Get these damn British troops out of my house.
Of course.
No Quartering Act, because there was actually British soldiers being put into people's houses. Privacy. Fourth Amendment. The right to privacy in the searches of our personal data.
Yes.
What big tech has created in surveillance capitalism is more pervasive and more intrusive than anything you could ever possibly. It's more pervasive than Marcus Wolf of the Stasi or Beria of the KGB,
yes,
of the NKVD could ever possibly imagine.
Or anything that happens in contemporary North Korea.
Yes, exactly. And we give it away. And we give it away freely. And so people still close the bathroom stall when you go into the toilet. You still close the shower curtain. We still do lots of things that we expect to have a privacy, but yet people with a regular phone put it on their nightstand and are surprised that the microphone is listening. I've had so many people I've talked to about, they said, I was talking to my wife about needing a new mattress in our bedroom. And the next day they're getting advertising for mattresses, which means the camera or the phone was listening to them in their bedroom, with all the follow-on conclusions to be drawn from that.
Yeah, given what happens in healthy bedrooms, so what happens to those recordings?
Well, we've been doing a study following our device, a Google Mobile Services phone, any Android running Google Mobile Services, which is all of them, or an iPhone, and at about 3 a.m., we're seeing a spike of data leaving the phone, about 50 megabytes. That is basically that phone dialing home to the mothership, exporting all of your goings on.
All your pillow talk is going to
Pillow talk, whatever. Right. So Zuckerberg paid $20 billion for WhatsApp. Why? Because every message, call, video, picture, voice note, everything that goes through there, they say, well, it's end-to-end encrypted. Yeah, it's end-to-end until it passes through their server, where it's sliced and diced and analyzed and used to sell advertising to that customer. If you're not paying for something, you're not the customer, you are the product. So if you want to get, well, I think people right now are used to Mark Zuckerberg listening from their nightstand every night, because that's effectively what your phone
So why isn't
does.
he like the creepiest person in world history if he's listening to what's going on in your bedroom?
Because they're able, as big tech, to shape that message. That's the frightening thing about the power of big tech and their ability to influence what you watch, what you think about candidates. If you search something, how they score those rankings, It is shocking. We have an antitrust problem here in America, vastly worse than in the late 1800s, early 1900s with oil and railways and steel and all the rest.
This is more important.
Yeah, this is literally how we communicate and interact with other human beings in our lives, how we gather and share information about the realities of life, of food, of medicine, of vaccines, of healthcare issues, of truth. And so and especially in an era of AI, it's scary stuff. The average kid in America, by the time they reach the age of 13, has had 72 million data points collected on them by big tech. So it's almost like that much collection allows digital grooming by big tech to share and to shape your preferences, how you interact, etc.
Including your sexual preferences. I mean, if you're being honest here.
Yeah, exactly.
Considering that young people are introduced to sexuality through pornography.
Yep.
Yeah. Given that there's no privacy, it's probably pretty dumb to watch porn.
Yeah. Nothing's private.
Right. So what happens to all this data?
Well, now, obviously it's used and stored. I mean, it's the bloom of data centers surrounding all these tech hubs around America is horrific, and all that data is being collected and stored. And
can I just ask you just a far field question? I'm just interested. So, given that those data centers are some of the biggest users of electricity, they're like a steel plant. Okay.
Yeah.
Massive electricity draw, and using electricity is, of course, destroying the planet and accelerating climate change. Why are the climate change zombies defacing paintings in museums and not protesting data centers?
I would say if they were coming after data centers, then they would be getting a nonstop stream of social media messaging of why they should be attacking art instead of data centers.
Well, exactly. But like, why are the AI ghouls? Why is Mark Zuckerberg? Why are they not climate criminals? Why am I a climate criminal for having a wood stove and a Silverado? But the people who run data centers, which literally draw more power than
with 100% backup as well.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not against using energy. I'm pro energy actually, and cheap energy. But by the current rules, they're criminals. So why does no one call them criminals?
Because big tech has shockingly complete control over how that messaging is.
Yes, over our minds and what we think. Sorry, but that you brought it right back to the point, which is...
And so now Congress, including a lot of Republicans in their idiocy, have not only extended FISA, right? FISA started as the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act.
Yeah, 1977-ish.
Yeah. Supposed to be monitoring how you collect intelligence or communications going to foreigners. Now FISA is really all about Americans. I guess we're treated as foreigners by our own government. And so the federal agencies got sick of getting beat up when they'd come before Congress for millions of times illegally accessing what was supposed to be FISA unauthorized communications information, and for buying all this commercial data that's collected and held and disseminated by big tech to facilitate advertising and typing and measuring where you go, what you buy, who you call, what you browse, everything about you, in a way that any previous intelligence boss would have salivated over. So now the new FISA, it's not an extension, it's a massive enlargement, says that any federal agent, for any reason, without probable cause or a warrant, can compel any company that holds any of that personal data to turn it over, allowing a massive fishing expedition on anybody that's considered an opponent of that off the reservation federal agent. It's really disgusting. Really, if it's not a Stamp Act Tea Party 1775 moment. I don't know what is, but it is ultimately your government having carte blanche to do a digital proctology exam on you with no questions asked.
Well, considering that these companies hold, audio of you having sex with your wife, video of you watching pornography, like stuff that, audio of you telling racial jokes or whatever, your most intimate moments, the ones that could be used to blackmail and destroy you, doing things you would not do in public and shouldn't do in public. Like that's the ultimate power, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess you either have to not give a shit and fight anyway.
Yeah.
Or
try to live virtuously too. It helps.
That always helps. Yep.
So how does your phone protect people against that?
Again, this, like I said, this era started 3.5 years ago, and we came at it from a completely contrarian view.
Yeah.
This phone, it's our hardware, made in Indonesia at a Singaporean facility. Our operating system, all our code, and we are solely focused on data sovereignty that you control.
It's pretty cool just that I am kind of impressed that you made hardware. You didn't just build an app like you actually.
Correct, because you have to control it down to the root level of the hardware and the software, so that we don't have an advertising ID, and our operating system blocks any attempt by any app to turn on your camera or your Wi-Fi or your microphone or your GPS or anything. We don't allow any of that leakage. In fact, we have a privacy center.
This is called the Unplugged.
This is an Unplugged phone. And this is effectively a firewall which prevents apps from doing all the things they're used to doing on all the other phones. So you're in control of what of your data goes out, which is effectively zero. This is like a safe. It comes in, it doesn't come out. So
just to bottom line it, I'm protected from what am I protected from if I use that?
Here's the thing. If you're using apps and some federal agency goes to that app purveyor and says, give me everything you have on Tucker that he's been using on that app, there'll be nothing because there's no data leaking from you, from your device to that app. If you call somebody, we have our own secure messenger. For example, you want to call and make a secure call and you call me, it takes about 5 seconds to connect because it's literally creating a encrypted tunnel between you and me. Generates a new encryption key every call. It's completely different.
So the government hates that, and there have been all kinds of legal battles over this question. They don't want secure communication between citizens because all of a sudden they care about human trafficking or something.
Yes, and their latest excuse for this massive FISA enlargement was drug trafficking.
Drug trafficking, right.
Because they've been failing for 40 freaking years at that.
Well, they just opened the southern border to fentanyl and human trafficking. So these exact same people are suddenly really worried about human trafficking and drugs.
Yeah, it's a joke. So right. We produced 500 units, fielded them last fall. We did a big beta test, and now we have 10,000 units, so people can order and deliver. And look, it is our effort to fight the power of big tech.
So what can't I do? I mean, I'll just confess that I use an iPhone made by a company I actually kind of hate and that hates my country and me, and I use it anyway because it's super
And we figured
easy.
There's a lot of people like you that would want to digitally opt out of the lie of big tech. And so what you can't do, obviously we don't have the Apple Store. We don't have Apple Music, but you can use Spotify. You can use a lot of the other streaming services on here. We just prevent them from collecting your data as to what you're listening to or where you are when you do it.
What about pictures?
Of course you can take pictures. And you can share pictures. You can send pictures. We have a lot of the other privacy-related apps, whether it's Signal or Threema or Proton or Telegram. We have
Why has nobody done this? So everyone complains about this. Everyone who pays any attention at all understands. Plus, the iPhone's incredibly expensive. But they have a hammer lock on your life. And so this seems like a pretty obvious...
Other people have tried it before, and they burn through a lot of money, and I don't think the timing is right.
They're not flying coach to Dubai, are they?
we did this.
Man, you are Dutch. I love that. Fly coach to Dubai.
For example, this phone also has a kill switch, an actual a switch which separates the battery from the electronics. You can't shut your iPhone off.
Oh, I know.
It's always listening. It's always pinging towers. It's always pinging Wi-Fi, building a digital breadcrumb trail of where you go and what you do.
Even if I turn the iPhone off, it's not off.
Correct. This, you turn that off, it's off because it physically separates battery from electronics. It's just like pulling the battery out of an old Nokia phone.
So I'm sorry I interrupted you. So this, I love this, of course. It's incredibly ambitious, but also on some level, it's kind of obvious. Like, why haven't we had this before? So you said people have tried, they spent too much money, and then I interrupted you.
And they tried maybe just with an app, and just with an app doesn't work. And people have tried to do it with a reskinned Google phone. We have this phone is incapable of running Google mobile services. So you're not going to get Google Maps. We have a way to navigate that works well. But again, so many of the freemium approaches where they've been boiling the frog of the people of the world, we provide them a digital alternative to that where you are in control of your First Amendment rights and your Fourth Amendment rights.
Amen. How hard is it to text people who don't have that phone?
It's just, it emits electrons. So ultimately you can see if it's on a tower or not, but we even provide it with a SIM, with a SIM provider, a data provider, a network airtime provider that, collects the minimum amount. Basically all they need is your zip code of where you're buying it. That's
but what I'm saying is if I am using an unplugged phone and my wife has an iPhone, I can text her.
Yes. Sure. And she can even put Unplugged Messenger on her iPhone as well.
How much more expensive is that than an iPhone?
This is $989. So it's cheaper, about $500 cheaper. And it's comparable in speed, storage, camera quality.
Can you actually get one?
Yeah, you can order it at unplugged.com/Tucker. And we will look, we're big believers. We're a big believer in your audience. I'm a long ardent fan, and we think your fans are our people. And so we are happy to compensate them and you guys, and we want to win in this together and give people a digital alternative to big tech owning their lives. Man,
so it's not a threat to Apple right now, but if there's big take up, it could be. So how do you expect them to try and stifle competition? It's a monopoly.
Sure.
They want to retain monopoly status.
Look, if you do a Google search for unplugged phone or things like that, they tend to stack every negative article possible written about it first.
Oh, there have been bad pieces written?
Of course. The left will always come after me and hate on me for anything.
Is it a racist phone?
The left used to be about free speech,
right,
and now they're really about kind of state control. But
does the phone deny the election in 2020? Just
I would argue that the phone cares about your First and Fourth Amendment rights, and since the erosion of that privacy, I just want to encourage everyone to use cash yet as well. Don't go to these, anyone that goes to these woke coffee shops and they say, we don't accept cash anymore. Look on the front of a dollar bill. It says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. No one has the ability to deny you using cash. So leave them the right change on the table and tell them to have a nice day. They cannot make you pay with a credit card. That is actually insurrectionist. If these businesses are denying you the ability to use legal tender of the United States government.
I had never thought of that. Has anyone tried that?
Oh yeah. I make an issue of it all the time, much to my kids' embarrassment. But yeah, I'm a big advocate. Cash is freedom. With the amount of data that is collected on you everywhere. You want to buy gas? Buy gas, pay cash, whatever. But what do we see in China where they really don't accept cash anymore? And it's become the ultimate surveillance state. That's where we're heading unless free people unite and resist that kind of totalitarian impulse of big government and big tech working together. In China, You have to pay with a WeChat app. So you do your banking through that. You acquire tickets for a bus, an airplane, a train through that. You pay road tolls through that. Everything is through this app controlled by the state. And so before they even go to a central bank digital currency, they literally have you by the balls, and they can zero you out
at that point
instantly.
Right.
Correct. And so we did this because for free people to be able to live in a free society, they have to communicate, they have to be able to hold and store data, and be able to gather that data without someone else filtering it through an app store that the bad guys control, that the big government guys control.
Where do you get cash?
From a bank?
So do you, it sounds like a stupid question, but there seem to be fewer ATMs. I don't think that's my imagination. In fact, it's not.
Sure.
Yeah, they don't want you to use cash.
There's a de-emphasis on cash.
Right. So if
cash equals freedom.
I could not agree with you more. And there's something kind of old school and cool about it anyway. But
I still remember my dad having $500 bills.
Yeah, why don't we have those anymore?
War on drugs.
Really?
Yeah. That would be a great thing for the next president of the United States.
What does that mean, war on drugs? So they stopped?
It was a war on cash to cut out illegal activity that was paid for in cash. William McKinley is on the $500 bill. I think they should bring it back and put Donald J. Trump on it. Can you imagine the heads exploding?
Yeah, that'd be pretty wild.
But so much of this explosion of government, perpetual wars and perpetual government stupidity comes back to very unsound money. And when we went off the gold standard, when Nixon did, how was it done? Was it a vote through Congress?
No.
Was it debated? It was an executive order, which means you can go back on with executive order as well.
Where are you on gold?
I'm very pro gold. It is for millennia been a store of value. And I'd say digital blockchain currencies, also interesting. It's hard. Look, anything is of value if someone recognizes it as a medium of exchange.
Right.
Right. I mean, there was a tulip inflation in the Netherlands in like 500 years ago.
Yes.
But tulips were currency, tulip bulbs. So lots of things can become,
So
if
the
things get
prettiest
really,
currency ever created.
if things get really scary, ammunition will be currency.
Yes.
Always has been.
Yes, I've had that thought personally.
You're storing up.
Ammunition, dogs. I have a lot of dogs too. So I feel like dogs will be more valuable at some point. So are you a gold buyer without getting too specific about it?
Some, yeah. But I mean, for heaven's sakes, started a company which took on not one, but two multi-trillion-dollar companies because, that was a dumb, crazy idea, 3.5 years ago. So that's, I've been investing in this capability for people to communicate securely and freely. And I hope it works. And it will never be a public company. We've taken no institutional money. It will be a private company, not subject to the SEC and all the other nonsense. It's not even an American registered company because I didn't want the U.S. government to be able to shut it down.
Yeah, it's interesting. Again, we haven't had a conversation really about your personal story, which is one of the most amazing personal stories of anyone I've ever met. But among the many twists and turns and ironies of your life is that someone as patriotic as you was basically at one point forced to flee to a foreign country.
Well, I didn't flee. I went there for a job opportunity, but I'd been attacked unbelievably.
Oh, I remember.
By
talking
the
about putting you in
USG,
jail. I remember that.
Every federal agency in the world was coming after us. And I paid about $2.5 million a month for 2 years straight in legal fees. I paid the highest per capita fine in State Department history. It was the only federal agency that actually stuck us with something because we had no means to contest it because at that point, we were working for the State Department, doing diplomatic security, protecting Americans, something we did more than 100,000 times with no State Department or U.S. official ever killed or injured on our watch. And sometimes the State Department would be demanding I need 50 more men here. I need 30 more men there. Go immediately. But another part of the State Department, the licensing department of the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, moving at the speed of peacetime, would be slow rolling on the licenses, the export license for like body armor or helmets,
right,
or guns, used by our people working for the State Department. And yeah, I'm not going to send a guy naked to a war zone, so we'd send stuff to do that mission for the State Department in Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever. And so, yeah, that was what they had us over the barrel. So they fined me $42 million for that.
Did you pay?
Had to. Yeah. Hillary Clinton.
Why didn't she like you?
I don't know.
Didn't like your vibe, I guess.
Not that so much.
She doesn't fly coach. Once again, where do people watching get that?
So I've been very active in the media, but they can go to unplugged.com/Tucker. Simple to remember.
Very active in the media. In other words, you're out there talking about
this. I'm for lack of a better spokesman, I'm kind of it for now, but we're looking for more if you'd like to be it. People can order and they'll get it within 36 hours usually.
How hard is it to operate?
It's very simple. Look, it's based on the Android kernel. So any of the apps built for Android, almost 95% of them work on this phone. But they look a little different because they're not blasting all the personal ads at you for using the app. So again, it's a way for people to be in the world digitally, but not of the world, and not have all your stuff collected, stored, and disseminated to all kinds of people that hate you.
Oh yeah, and then it's available, of course, to the U.S. government, which...
And another important feature, I think you'll appreciate, on our Messenger, we even have a dump feature. So if you're using Unplugged Messenger and someone comes and says, Tucker, give me your phone, I'm here to inspect it. You say, sure, officer, and you unlock it with a certain code. When you hand it to them, it's a brick. It's a paperweight because it wipes. It's an auto dump feature which wipes the messages, or it can even dump the entire phone. Dump as in zero it out, hard factory reset, unrecoverable, FU.
Seriously?
Yep.
So you're traveling through a foreign airport, which is where in our airports, this has happened. Yeah. And you can erase the phone.
Instantly.
So one of the reasons that I really passionately dislike Apple and Google is because they'll take your communications and give them to the government without telling you.
Yes. In fact, out of this FISA bill just passed, they're not even allowed to tell you that your stuff has been accessed by this random federal agency or whatever. So it is a Big Brother expansion bill is what that was.
So,
and this, I mean, luck or timing or, I don't know, anticipating where the problem is going to be, started this journey 3 years ago. We're now here. It's not hypothetical anymore. These are available, and we've just shipped 3,500 of them, and there's a few left.
You see this in civil suits too. Not that I'm speaking from experience, but the people who oppose you can wind up with all your text messages, and then it's a short trip from there to, say, the New York Times.
Exactly. And a text without a context is a pretext for trouble.
Oh, I love that. A text without a context is a pretext for trouble.
Yep.
Luckily, in my case, I wasn't really doing anything wrong other than using naughty language. But
all the better to have a burn time on all those messages, so it's not looked at a year or 5 years later with some completely different lens.
I agree with that because right.
And so, and again, nothing is stored. It's either on your device. If you send me a message, it's on this device or your device, and we can set a burn time where it's gone, unrecoverable,
but
anytime,
the feds
anywhere.
Can never come to you and say, as the owner and spokesman for Unplugged, we want the text messages for so and so.
We got nothing, man. We store nothing. It's stored on your device or this device, and you can.
Whereas Apple, if I use iMessage, which I do,
correct, and you can set a burn time on this where it disappears and it's gone.
But just to be clear, so this is my grubby iPhone. If I'm texting on iMessage. And
they're storing all of it.
Yeah, I got 59 text messages while we were talking this morning.
That's why you're so slow to respond to text. You're deluged.
Well, it's also my birthday, so lots of people
are
texting me. But anyway, the point is, and I don't have any unauthorized birthday messages, but But that's a lot. I mean, people
Yeah.
conduct I'll speak for myself. I conduct my life through text message.
Exactly.
Apple has all of that.
For all eternity.
And they will happily give that to the government.
Without question. And now they're compelled to turn it over without even a warrant or probable cause. So again, if people are sick of that,
So users of Unplugged are protected from that, invulnerable. There's no, that
if
can
they're
never
using
happen.
Unplugged message, if you send a regular text on Unplugged, it's going to pass through a phone carrier.
Right.
They'll have that message. But if you send a message on Unplugged Messenger,
Yeah.
gone. You can set a burn time on it and it's gone and unrecoverable. Not stored by us or anybody else.
Well, that seems like freedom to me.
I will always choose freedom
Amen.
and fight like crazy for it.
So let me just end this with an apology for interrupting you in the middle of one of the most interesting things you were saying. So I said, name 3 places that Americans are not paying attention to, since you are, I don't want to violate your privacy by saying where you are, but I just happen to know that you're in places I can't even find them on a map, and I'm pretty good at geography. So I think you are the person to ask. What are 3 places that we're not paying attention to that we ought to be? And I interrupted you after the first one because it was so interesting, and you said Mexico.
Mexico, fentanyl, the CCP very much promoting. So AMLO is a super socialist president there now.
Yeah.
There's a even worse leftist female about to take over. And
Leftist female. I love how you describe her.
she's very much a Marxist protege.
Oh, she is. No, she's a leftist female for sure.
With active programs by the CCP to support the most leftist candidates there in Mexico. That's a problem. It's become more and more of a narco state with cartels having very significant influence, if not control, locally or regionally throughout the country. And that's literally our southern border. And the AMLO government actively promoting and cooperating with that kind of CCP nonsense. Positive note, just a right-wing guy elected in Panama who says he's going to shut the Darien Gap, which is the area that moves all kinds of people. Now, you asked for 3. I might give you a couple more than 3 if you got time.
Please do.
The active spend of NGOs that the U.S. government funds, which enables mass migration into Latin America to walk north to invade across our southern border, is massive and disgusting and illegal and wrong. I remember 3 months ago, I was contacted by an NGO in Haiti asking if I could organize an aircraft to fly from Port-au-Prince to Managua daily. I said, why on earth would you want to do that? They said, well, Haitians can fly to Nicaragua visa-free. I said, I know why. It's to facilitate Haitians coming to Nicaragua and then walking north to facilitate illegal migration from there.
Do we have a Haitian shortage here?
I don't think so. No. And there is a massive network of those NGOs. And some of those guys are making, the CEOs of these things are making $1 million a year, taking U.S. taxpayer money, facilitating the maneuver, entrance of illegal migrants into the United States, funded by the U.S. taxpayers. It's disgusting. And if Republicans actually have the power of the purse, this needs to stop. And the fact that they don't means we have a uniparty problem. So we probably need a Milei type solution of a complete change in parties to fix this.
I agree completely.
But
But you do sort of wonder, since there's no economic justification for this level, millions of uneducated people from the poorest countries of the world coming to your country. There's no, especially with AI, there are no jobs for these people. They're just...
But just the fact that the Democrats were actively seeking to register them as voters and to make it possible to vote, you know exactly what they're doing. They're trying to stack the deck.
But I mean, you've been around wars your whole life. You tell me, if you've got the mass movement of military-aged males into a country, some of them with prison records, what are you looking at here?
Yeah.
Does that make you nervous at all?
Sure. But I also know cannon fodder doesn't do very well against a sophisticated capability.
Yeah.
And the fact is, the people that actually did the fighting and the dying and the hard combat in the last 20 years, they don't agree to that kind of nonsense because they've laid their lives and their brothers and their health on the line for America for a long time, and they're not going to sit quietly about that nonsense.
But I mean, but there's already an effort in the Congress to make illegal aliens citizens if they serve in the U.S. military.
I'm not opposed to a longer-term Legionnaire type program if someone comes here and actually serves, and with obviously very, very strict performance guidelines. I mean, we're not don't hire a guy to be a truck driver in the Army and get citizenship. No, but I'm not so opposed to that. But all the other stuff they want to do around voting and driver's licenses and all that stuff, there's a lot of actions that the next administration can take to make it very difficult for those illegals to remain here by debanking and de-platforming them, what the left has been doing to people like us for the last 20
people
years
who were born here.
to make that difficult. Okay, so Latin America, big problem. In Guyana, country most people haven't heard about other than where Jim Jones served Kool-Aid, made the largest energy discovery in this hemisphere in the last 50 years. So it's enormous. And Venezuela has been now declared that 70% of Guyana's territory is theirs, dusting off a 130-year-old border dispute. And I think you're going to see Venezuela annex or seize that with largely impunity in the coming months or years, certainly. If the Democrat administration continues, they'll take it because there's no consequences for it. And so you're really seeing a complete collapse, a erasure of the Monroe Doctrine, this idea that what happens in the Western Hemisphere is America's business and not the business of Russia and China. The collapse of credibility of France and of the United States in Africa is now really accelerating. The jihad problem that was persistent in Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger. And why do these countries matter? Huge gold, huge uranium, other minerals there. And now Chad, Sudan. The U.S. had 2 big bases in Niger, and they were just pushed out. Cost $1 billion plus easily. Big air bases, drone bases that were trying to do CT support all across Africa, pushed out by a collapse of credibility by the U.S., by the French, and the Russians have pushed in. And the Russians are using a Wagner capability, a hybrid private military company type capability to enable the expansion of military capability in those countries, while at the same time a voracious appetite for gold and other minerals, uranium of high value there. And so you're seeing, to me, it's a reversion to the norm of what you saw in the 1600s.
I was just thinking that exact same thing. As the dollar declines, of course, gold becomes more important. Right?
Yes. Right. Gold and uranium and actual green energy.
That's right.
Which, so there's nothing really that new in warfare, just different, maybe a little bit of different tech that changes how things are done, but how nations interact with each other. I think you'll see a return to privateers and to a lot more private sector because our big bloated super state federal government has proven, well, at least now for the last 30 years, it's not very good at putting the fires out.
Civilization
managing the conflict doesn't work. Clearing the decks and putting a tourniquet on some of these things is necessary.
Our last question: it does seem like civilization's in retreat in a lot of places. Order, free movement, relatively open markets, civility, self-restraint. Just all this sort of hallmarks of an open society of like Western civilization. They all seem to be in decline. Do you see that, and are you worried about it?
Yeah, look, civilizations ebb and flow, and I look for pockets of normalcy. Of however crazy things get, people still figure out how to get on with it and carry on. And there's certainly pockets within Europe where they still do that. There's pockets in parts of the Middle East. There's even some pockets in South Africa that I would consider islands of normalcy. And in Latin America as well. I come back to Milei. What a spectacular man who just took on his entire political establishment and said, afuera, out, right? So I'm still drawn, and I recommend the book a lot. It's called To Dare and to Conquer. And a friend gave it to me years ago, and it's a history of special operations throughout history, all the way from Alexander the Great and his men that climbed Sogdian Rock, and to the present of a few picked men and women, very capable warriors that flew in the face of unsurmountable odds and made it happen and changed world history. So I think there's a lot of hope in that. And big government is really dumb and quite plotting. And I know folks that have worked in Google and Apple, and they pull their hair out at how inane and stupid a lot of those things are. And so I view them probably as dumb as the U.S. was in Afghanistan, and an opponent that can be defeated with wily, creative, very focused, and my dad always told me persistence and determination. And I try to live by that. And I come back to my favorite quote from Churchill. And he said, he was speaking before the Canadian Parliament a year after the Battle of Britain said, he said, a year ago, Herr Hitler said he would wring the neck of the British people like a chicken in 6 weeks. And I stand before you a year later and I say, some chicken, some neck.
Erik Prince, thank you.
Thanks, Tucker.